Jake Martinez floated through the main hallway of Nexus Galactic Academy, his magnetic boots clicking softly against the metal floor. The space station was huge, bigger than any city he had ever seen on Earth. Curved walls stretched up toward a clear dome that showed the stars beyond. Students from dozens of different worlds walked, crawled, and slithered past him, their alien voices creating a constant buzz of conversation. 3 months had passed since Jake arrived at the academy. 3 months of being the only human among thousands of alien students. He still felt out of place every single day. A group of Florians hopped past him, their long ears twitching nervously when they noticed him watching. The rabbit-like aliens always seemed scared around Jake, even though he had never done anything to threaten them. Their fur would stand on end whenever he got too close, and they would whisper to each other in their high-pitched voices. Jake sighed and continued toward his next class. The Florians were not the only ones who acted strange around him. Most of the other students treated him like he was dangerous. They called humans deathworlders because Earth was so harsh compared to their peaceful home planets. To them, any species that survived on a world with predators, diseases, and natural disasters had to be violent and primitive. The Centauri students were just as bad. These deer-like aliens would freeze completely when Jake entered a room, their large eyes wide with fear. They had evolved on a world with no predators at all, so the idea of a species that hunted for survival terrified them beyond reason. Even the more advanced species looked down on humans. The Altarians, with their tall blue bodies and superior technology, treated Jake like a barely civilized barbarian. They would speak slowly to him, as if he could not understand complex ideas. The Zekthi, insect-like beings with incredible mathematical abilities, simply ignored him completely. Jake reached his dormitory level and walked down the familiar corridor. His room was at the very end, separated from the other students. The academy had put him there for everyone's comfort, though Jake knew it was really because the other students were afraid to live near him. He pressed his palm against the door scanner and stepped inside. The room was small but comfortable, with a bed, desk, and viewing port that looked out into space. Jake had decorated the walls with pictures from Earth, forests, mountains, oceans. The images made him feel less alone in this strange place. His communication device beeped with a message from his parents back on Earth. Jake smiled as he read their words of encouragement. They reminded him that he was representing all of humanity at the academy, the first human student ever accepted into the prestigious school. No pressure at all. Jake had earned his place through pure academic achievement. His test scores in physics, biology, and mathematics were higher than most alien students, despite their advanced education systems. But none of that seemed to matter to his classmates. All they saw was a predator from a death world. The next morning, Jake made his way to the dining hall for breakfast. The massive room was divided into sections based on dietary needs. Herbivore students sat in one area, eating various plants and fruits. Omnivores had their own section with a mix of foods. The few carnivore species kept to themselves in a corner, though even they seemed uncomfortable around Jake. Jake took his tray to an empty table near the viewing windows. He had learned not to sit too close to other students. His presence made them nervous, and their nervous energy made meal times unpleasant for everyone. As he ate, Jake watched the other students interact with each other. Florians chatted happily. With Centauri students, their prey species instincts making them natural allies. Altarians discussed complex theories with Zekthi scholars. their advanced minds finding common ground. Even the aquatic aquarians, who had to wear special breathing apparatus outside water, were welcomed into most social groups. But no one approached Jake's table. No one invited him to study groups or social events. He was an outsider, tolerated, but never truly accepted. Professor Kelmore, an elderly Altarian who taught galactic history, had once explained the situation to Jake in private. The professor meant well, but his words stung. "You must understand, young human," he had said. "Most species here evolved on peaceful worlds. Your people come from a planet where violence is necessary for survival. It makes others uncomfortable." Jake had wanted to argue that humans were capable of great kindness and cooperation. But how could he explain that to beings who had never faced a natural predator? How could he make them understand that Earth's harshness had taught humans to be resourceful and determined, not just violent? The Academy itself was a marvel of galactic cooperation. Different species had worked together to build this floating city among the stars. The artificial gravity systems accommodated beings who had evolved in different conditions. The atmosphere was carefully controlled to support various breathing requirements. Environmental suits and breathing devices allowed aquatic and gas giant species to attend classes alongside land-dwelling students. Jake finished his breakfast and headed to his first class of the day. Advanced physics was one of his favorites, partly because the subject matter was universal. Math and science worked the same way regardless of what planet you came from. In physics class, Jake could sometimes forget about the species barriers and just focus on learning. But even there, group projects were awkward. Other students would work with Jake when required, but they always seemed tense and eager to finish quickly. They never invited him to continue discussions after class or to join informal study sessions. Walking through the academy corridors, Jake noticed the beautiful artwork that decorated the walls. Each piece represented a different member species of the Galactic Council. Peaceful landscapes, abstract representations of mathematical concepts, flowing sculptures that captured the beauty of various home worlds. There was even a small section dedicated to Earth, though the images focused on humanity's cities and technology rather than the wild landscapes that had shaped human evolution. Jake paused in front of a particular painting that showed representatives from dozens of species working together on some great project. The image was meant to inspire cooperation and unity among different peoples. But looking at it, Jake could not help but notice that the human figure was placed at the edge of the group, slightly separated from the others. That afternoon, Jake attended his favorite class, xenobiology, taught by Professor Zenmak. The ancient Altarian was one of the few instructors who treated Jake with genuine respect. Professor Zenmak had lived for over 300 years and had seen many species join the galactic community. He understood that diversity brought strength, even when that diversity made others uncomfortable. As Jake settled into his seat, he noticed the usual pattern. Students arranged themselves in a rough circle around the classroom, but there was always an empty space around Jake's desk. No one sat directly next to the human Deathworlder. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove that humans belonged in galactic society. Jake was determined to succeed, not just for himself, but for all the humans who might follow in his footsteps. Someday, he hoped, the barriers would come down and species differences would be seen as strengths rather than sources of fear. Advanced xenobiology had always been Jake's favorite class, but today the familiar classroom felt like a battlefield. Professor Zenmak stood at the front, his ancient Altarian features calm despite the obvious tension in the room. Students had arranged themselves in the most defensive pattern Jake had ever seen. The herbivore species clustered together on one side of the room, as far from both Jake and Vextar as possible. Flurian ears twitched constantly, and several Centauri students kept glancing toward the exit as if planning escape routes. The more advanced species had positioned themselves strategically in the middle, creating a buffer zone between predators and prey. Vextar sat 2 rows behind Jake, his presence filling the space like a storm cloud. The young Korthak warrior had been at the academy for only 3 days, but his reputation had already grown beyond his actual actions. Students whispered stories about ritual combat and honor killings, turning every glance from Vextar into a potential threat assessment. Today, we will examine predator-prey relationships in galactic ecosystems, Professor Zenmak announced, seemingly unaware of the irony. Understanding these natural dynamics helps us appreciate the diversity of life throughout our galaxy. Jake noticed several students shift uncomfortably in their seats. Discussing predation in theory was very different from sitting in a room with actual predators. Linda, a Zekthi student with delicate insect features, raised one of her 4 arms. Professor, how do predator species control their natural instincts? In civilized society? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Jake felt dozens of eyes turn toward him and Vextar, waiting for some sign of barely contained violence. Professor Zenmak stroked his chin thoughtfully. An excellent question, Linda. Intelligence allows all species to rise above their base programming. Even the most aggressive hunters can learn cooperation and restraint. But what about species that still practice ritual killing? Asked Neva, an Aquarian student whose breathing apparatus made her voice sound mechanical. How can such beings truly embrace peaceful coexistence? Jake could feel the tension ratcheting higher. Everyone knew who Neva was really asking about, even if she did not name Vexitar directly. From behind, Jake came a low rumble that might have been laughter. You speak of things you do not understand, water breather, Vexitar said, his voice carrying easily through the translation device. Several students gasped. A Flurian near the front actually squeaked in terror. Professor Zenmak raised his hand for calm, but Vextar continued speaking. The hunt teaches respect for life, not disregard for it, the young Korthak said. Only those who have faced death can truly value existence. Your prey species multiply endlessly because life cost you nothing. That's exactly what I mean, Neva responded, her artificial voice rising. You talk about facing death and hunting as if violence is something to celebrate. I do not celebrate violence, Vexitar replied, his tone growing colder. I honor it. There is a difference that your peaceful mind cannot grasp. The classroom erupted in frightened whispers. Several Centauri students stood up, preparing to flee. Even some of the normally composed Altarians looked disturbed by Vextar's words. Perhaps we should focus on the scientific aspects of predation, Professor Zenmak suggested, trying to regain control of his class. But Vextar was not finished. Your academy claims to value diversity, yet you fear any student who does not fit your narrow definition of civilized behavior. You welcome the human because his people have abandoned their hunting nature. But what of those who maintain their strength? Jake turned in his seat to look at Vextar directly. The Korthak's dark eyes burned with frustration and challenge. This was more than just academic discussion. It was a test of everyone's commitment to the Academy's ideals. My people have not abandoned anything, Jake said quietly, but his voice carried clearly through the room. We have learned to choose when and how to use our abilities. Vextar's expression shifted, showing interest for the first time. You claim to maintain your edge, human? Yet you sit peacefully among prey species who fear you. Fear and respect are different things, Jake replied. Earning respect requires more than just being dangerous. A Florian student named Petra spoke up from the front of the room, her voice trembling but determined. Easy words from someone who has never been hunted. You predators always talk about honor and choice, but what choice do prey species have when you decide we are threats? The question struck deeper than Jake expected. He realized that Petra was not just talking about theoretical predation. She was expressing real fear about sharing space with beings who could hurt her. You have the choice to see us as people rather than just predators, Jake said gently. Just as we choose to see you as people rather than just prey. But do you make that choice? Vextar asked, his voice cutting through Jake's diplomatic answer. When your instincts scream that the weak should be culled, do you truly silence them? Or do you simply pretend they do not exist? The classroom fell completely silent. Even Professor Zenmak seemed uncertain how to respond to such a direct challenge. Jake felt the weight of every gaze in the room. This was the moment that would define how the Academy moved forward. He could give a safe, diplomatic answer that would calm everyone's fears, or he could be honest about the reality of being a predator among prey. My instincts are always there, Jake admitted. Every human has them. We notice escape routes, weakness, vulnerability. It is part of how we survived on Earth. But intelligence means we can choose not to act on those instincts. Several students shifted nervously, but Jake continued. The difference between a predator and a monster is choice. Predators hunt when they need to survive. Monsters hunt for pleasure. Neither humans nor Korthak are monsters. Vextar leaned forward in his seat. You speak truth, human. But these prey species will never understand. They see only the capacity for violence, not the restraint that prevents it. Then maybe we need to show them something different, Jake said. And how would you suggest we do that? Vextar asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Before Jake could answer, Linda spoke up from her position in the middle of the room. Maybe by not talking about us like we are not here? The comment brought a moment of startled silence, followed by nervous laughter from several students. Linda was right. The predators had been discussing the prey species as if they were objects rather than fellow classmates. Professor Zenmak seized the opportunity to regain control. An excellent point, Linda. Perhaps we should hear from all perspectives on this topic. How do different species view the concept of predation in modern galactic society? For the next hour, the class engaged in the most honest discussion about species differences that Jake had witnessed since arriving at the Academy. Prey species talked about their genuine fears and the biological programming that made them see predators as threats. Omnivore species discussed their position between the extremes. Even the herbivores admitted that they had their own forms of aggression, usually expressed through territory disputes rather than hunting. Vexitar participated more thoughtfully than Jake had expected. The young warrior explained Korthak concepts of honor and controlled violence without the threatening undertones he had used earlier. He spoke about how ritual combat served to channel aggressive instincts in constructive ways, preventing random violence. Jake found himself serving as an unexpected translator between the different viewpoints. His human perspective allowed him to understand both the predatory mindset and the prey species' fears. He helped explain why certain words triggered fear responses and how predators could communicate without seeming threatening. As class ended, the students filed out with less obvious tension than when they had arrived. The discussion had not solved all the problems, but it had opened communication channels that had been blocked by fear and assumption. Jake gathered his materials slowly, thinking about what had happened. Vextar approached his desk as the last few students left the room. "You handled that well, human," the Korthak said. "Perhaps there is wisdom in your approach after all." "Learning to live together is harder than I expected," Jake admitted. "But giving up would make all the fear justified." Vextar nodded slowly. "Indeed. The hunt for understanding may be more challenging than any physical prey." As they walked out of the classroom together, Jake noticed something he had not seen before. Other students were watching them, but the expressions were different now. Instead of pure fear, he saw curiosity and cautious interest. The conversation had not eliminated the barriers between species, but it had proven that those barriers could be discussed and maybe overcome. Professor Zenmak stopped Jake at the door. "Well done today, young human," the ancient Altarian said, quietly. "You may have prevented a much larger conflict from developing." Jake looked back at the classroom where so much tension had played out. "We just talked, Professor. Nothing more." "Sometimes," Professor Zenmak replied with a wise smile, "talking is the most important action of all." The field trip to the Academy's biodome was supposed to be educational and relaxing. Professor Zenmak had planned the visit to show students how different planetary ecosystems could coexist in artificial environments. The massive dome contained sections representing dozens of different world types, from the misty forests of Altair Prime to the crystal caves of the Zekthi homeworld. Jake walked with the group of 30 students through the Earth section, where familiar trees and plants made him feel momentarily homesick. The biodome was one of the few places at the Academy where he felt truly comfortable. The scents and sounds reminded him of camping trips with his family in the mountains of Colorado. Vextar moved through the forest section with obvious appreciation. The Korthak homeworld was harsh and wild, similar to Earth in many ways. Jake noticed how the young warrior's posture relaxed slightly among the trees, as if the artificial wilderness awakened positive memories. The prey species were less comfortable in the forested areas. Petra and her fellow Flurians stayed close. Together, their ears constantly swiveling to check for threats that existed only in their genetic memory. The Centauri students moved in tight formation, their herd instincts taking over despite the obvious safety of the guided tour. "Notice how each ecosystem maintains its own atmospheric balance," Professor Zenmak explained as they moved into the Aquarian section. Humid air and the sound of flowing water filled the space, designed to accommodate the amphibious students who needed higher moisture levels. Neva seemed more relaxed here, her breathing apparatus functioning smoothly in the water-rich environment. She swam briefly in one of the deeper pools, demonstrating her species' natural grace in aquatic settings. The group was transitioning into the crystalline Zekthi section when everything went wrong. A deep, grinding sound echoed through the biodome, followed by the mechanical screech of failing equipment. Emergency lights began flashing as the artificial gravity fluctuated wildly. Students stumbled and fell as gravitational fields shifted without warning. "Everyone remain calm," Professor Zenmak called out, but his voice was nearly drowned by the sound of collapsing support structures. The gravity generator, located beneath the crystalline section, had experienced a catastrophic failure. The sudden loss of gravitational control caused the crystal formations above to become unstable. Massive structures that had stood for decades began to crack and fall. Jake grabbed Petra as a large crystal formation crashed down where she had been standing. The Florian student was too shocked to thank him, her prey instincts completely overwhelmed by the unfolding disaster. "Move away from the crystal section!" Professor Zenmak shouted, but it was too late. A cascade failure was already beginning. As the largest crystals fell, they damaged the environmental systems that maintained the different atmospheric zones. The careful balance of gases and humidity that allowed different species to coexist began to break down. Worse yet, the falling crystals had punctured the main atmospheric recycling conduits. Toxic gases normally filtered out of the air began to leak into the biodome. The sweet, dangerous scent of nitrogen oxide started to fill the artificial environment. The students panicked. Florians scattered in all directions, their individual survival instincts overriding any group coordination. Centauri clustered together but seemed frozen by indecision. Even the normally rational Altarians appeared confused by the sudden emergency. Jake counted quickly. 30 students had entered the biodome, but he could only see about half of them in the immediate area. The others were trapped somewhere in the collapsed crystal section, probably injured and definitely in danger from the rising toxic gas. "Professor, how long before the toxic levels become lethal?" Jake asked, his voice cutting through the panic. Professor Zenmak checked his environmental scanner with shaking hands. 20 minutes, maybe less. The automatic systems are trying to compensate, but the damage is too extensive. Vexitar appeared at Jake's side, his warrior training helping him stay calm in the crisis. "The weak scatter while the strong assess," he said, but there was no mockery in his voice. "What do you see, human?" Jake studied the wreckage with the systematic thinking that had served humans well during millions of years of survival challenges. The crystal formations had fallen in a specific pattern, creating both barriers and potential pathways. Emergency crews would need at least an hour to cut through the debris, but the trapped students did not have that long. "There," Jake pointed, to a gap between two large crystals. "The formation creates a natural bridge, but it's unstable. Someone light and fast could get through to check for survivors." Linda stepped forward, her insect-like body perfectly suited for navigating tight spaces. "I can climb through there," she offered, though her voice shook with fear. "Too dangerous." "Alone," Vexitar said. "The crystals could shift at any moment." Jake studied the situation more carefully. The toxic gas was heavier than the normal atmosphere, which meant it would settle in the lower areas first. Students trapped at ground level were in immediate danger, but anyone who had climbed higher might have more time. "We need to work together," Jake said, his natural leadership abilities taking over. "Linda, you are right about climbing through, but we need to secure the route first. Vexitar, your strength could stabilize some of those loose crystals." The Korthak warrior nodded, understanding immediately. "And you, human? What will you do?" Jake was already pulling emergency supplies from the biodome's safety stations. Every section had basic survival equipment, including portable air filters and emergency medical supplies. "I will coordinate and handle the technical problems. We need to create a safe breathing zone and get the injured to safety." Professor Zenmak looked overwhelmed by the scale of the disaster. "The emergency crews will handle this. We should evacuate the remaining students and wait for professional help." "Professor, with respect, professional help will arrive too late," Jake said firmly. "The students trapped in there will be dead from gas poisoning before rescue crews cut through the debris." Neva swam closer to the group, her aquatic adaptations allowing her to move efficiently despite the chaos. The water systems are still working in my section. If we could bring injured students there, the higher humidity might help with the toxic gas exposure. Jake felt a surge of hope. Neva was right. The aquatic section had independent atmospheric controls that were still functioning. It could serve as a safe zone while they organized the rescue operation. That's perfect, Jake said. We will set up a medical station in the aquatic section. Linda scouts for survivors while Vextar clears the route. I will coordinate everything and handle any technical problems we encounter. Petra stepped forward hesitantly. What about the rest of us? How can we help? Jake looked at the frightened prey species students and realized they needed to feel useful rather than helpless. You know this biodome better than anyone. Guide the injured to the aquatic section and help set up the medical station. Your knowledge of the layout could save lives. For the first time since the disaster began, the panic started to organize into purposeful action. Students who had been paralyzed by fear found direction in Jake's calm leadership. But as they began to move toward the collapsed crystal section, Jake noticed something troubling in Vextar's posture. The young Korthak's breathing had changed, becoming deeper and more controlled. His eyes moved constantly, tracking movement and assessing threats. The crisis was awakening Vextar's combat instincts. The same warrior programming that made him dangerous in battle was starting to see the weaker students as potential liabilities rather than people to protect. Jake realized that saving the trapped students would require more than just technical solutions. He would need to manage Vextar's predatory responses while coordinating a complex rescue operation. The young warrior's strength was essential for moving the heavy crystals, but his instincts might make him more dangerous than helpful. As toxic gas continued to rise and time ran out for the trapped students, Jake prepared to discover whether cooperation between predator and prey species was possible under the ultimate test of life and death. Jake moved through the wreckage with the focused intensity that millions of years of human evolution had hardwired into his species. While others panicked or froze, his mind automatically cataloged escape routes, structural weaknesses, and resource availability. The same pattern recognition that had helped human ancestors survive everything from predator attacks to natural disasters now guided him through the collapsed biodome. "Linda, wait!" Jake called out as the Zekthi student prepared to climb into the debris field. "Let me check the structural integrity first." Jake pulled out his student tablet and accessed the biodome's construction databases. Within seconds, he had the engineering schematics displayed, showing load-bearing points and weak spots in the crystal formations. His human brain, evolved for three-dimensional thinking and spatial relationships, quickly identified the safest path through the wreckage. "Follow the blue line I am marking," Jake told Linda, tracing a route on his tablet that appeared as a glowing path on her device. "Those crystals are anchored to the main support structure. Avoid anything marked in red. Those formations are unstable." While Linda began her careful climb, Jake turned to Vextar. The Korthak warrior was breathing heavily, his predatory instincts clearly triggered by the crisis situation. Jake needed to channel that aggressive energy into something productive before it became dangerous. "Vextar, I need you to move that crystal blocking the main passage," Jake said, pointing to a formation twice the warrior's size. "But do it slowly and carefully. If it shifts wrong, the whole section could collapse." The physical challenge gave Vextar something to focus on besides his awakening combat instincts. The young Korthak positioned himself against the massive crystal and began to push with controlled strength. His natural armor scraped against the mineral surface as he gradually shifted the obstruction. Jake was already working on the next problem. The portable air filters from the emergency stations were designed for individual use, but he needed to create a clean breathing zone for multiple injured students. His human ingenuity, honed by generations of ancestors who had to solve life or death problems with limited resources, suggested a solution. Using emergency medical tape and flexible tubing from the aquatic section, Jake began connecting multiple air filters together. The improvised system would not win any engineering awards, but it would provide breathable air for several people at once. Neva, I need you to set up the medical station exactly where I show you, Jake said, marking a spot in the aquatic section on his tablet. The water currents will help disperse the clean air from my filter system. The Aquarian student moved with surprising efficiency, her amphibious nature allowing her to work both in and out of the water. She arranged emergency medical supplies in the optimal locations Jake had calculated, creating a triage area that could handle multiple patients. Petra and the other Florians had overcome their initial panic and were now following Jake's instructions with desperate determination. Their natural speed and agility made them excellent messengers, carrying supplies and information between the different work areas. Petra, I need you to monitor the toxic gas levels with this scanner, Jake said, handing her a device from the emergency kit. Tell me immediately if the readings spike in any area. The Florian student took the scanner with shaking paws but nodded firmly. Having a specific job to do helped control her prey species' panic responses. Linda's voice crackled through the communication device. Jake, I found them. 5 students trapped in a pocket near the old Altarian section. 2 are unconscious, and 1 has a broken leg. Jake felt a surge of relief mixed with urgency. Finding the trapped students was only the first step. Getting them out safely would require precise coordination and careful timing. Can you reach them safely? Jake asked. Yes, but the toxic gas is getting thicker down here. I can smell it even through my breathing apparatus. Jake checked his improvised air filter system. It was working, but barely. He needed to get clean. Air to the trapped students immediately, but the filter setup was not portable enough to move through the debris field. His human brain shifted into high-speed problem-solving mode. Millions of years of ancestors who had faced similar life or death challenges had passed down the ability to see solutions that other species missed. Jake studied the biodome's systems, looking for something others had overlooked. The irrigation system, Jake said suddenly. Neva, can you access the water flow controls from your section? Yes, but why would we need water pressure right now? Not water, Jake explained, his words coming rapidly as the solution crystallized. Air pressure. The irrigation system has its own air pumps to prevent water contamination. If we reverse the flow and redirect it through the maintenance tunnels, we can push clean air directly to the trapped students. Neva's eyes widened behind her breathing apparatus. That is brilliant. The maintenance tunnels connect all sections, and the air pumps are powerful enough to create positive pressure zones. Jake was already moving toward the environmental control panel, his fingers flying over the interface. Human pattern recognition allowed him to understand the complex system quickly, seeing connections that would take other species much longer to grasp. Vextar, I need that passage clear in exactly 3 minutes, Jake called out. Linda, get the conscious students ready to move. The air pressure will give us a window, but not a long one. The Korthak warrior responded with increased effort, his massive strength moving crystals that emergency crews would need heavy equipment to handle. But Jake noticed something concerning. Vexitar's breathing was becoming more labored, and his movements more aggressive. The stress of the situation was pushing the young warrior toward a combat state where rational thought became secondary to survival instincts. In a few more minutes, Vextar might start seeing the weaker students as threats rather than people to protect. Jake needed to finish the rescue quickly before Vextar's predatory programming took complete control. Air pressure is building, Neva reported. I am reading positive flow in sectors 7 through 12. Petra's scanner chimed urgently. Jake, the toxic gas readings just dropped significantly in the trapped area. Your air pressure system is working. Jake felt a moment of satisfaction, but there was no time to celebrate. They had created a temporary safe zone, but moving injured students through unstable debris would still be extremely dangerous. Linda, start bringing them out one at a time, Jake ordered. Conscious students first, then the injured. Vextar, I need you to stabilize the route as they come through. The next few minutes tested every aspect of Jake's leadership abilities. He coordinated the rescue like a conductor directing an orchestra, each student playing a crucial role in the complex operation. His human capacity for multitasking and crisis management kept all the different elements working together. But as the first rescued student emerged from the debris, Jake saw that Vextar was losing his battle with instinct. The Korthak's eyes had taken on the flat, calculating look of a predator evaluating threats. His movements were becoming more territorial, positioning himself between the rescued students and potential escape routes. Jake realized that the greatest danger to the rescue operation might not be the toxic gas or unstable crystals. It might be the young warrior who was slowly reverting to his species' most dangerous instincts. The final phase of the rescue would require Jake to manage not just the technical challenges, but also the psychological state of a Korthak warrior whose combat programming was taking control of his rational mind. Jake watched Vextar's transformation with growing concern. The young Korthak warrior's breathing had shifted to the deep, controlled pattern that preceded combat. His posture was becoming more territorial, and his eyes tracked the movements of the weaker students with predatory focus. The crisis was awakening millions of years of Korthak evolution. On their harsh homeworld, survival often meant making quick decisions about who could be saved and who had to be sacrificed. Vextar's instincts were starting to categorize the injured students as liabilities that might threaten the survival of the stronger members of the group. Jake needed to act quickly before Vextar's warrior programming completely overrode his rational mind. Vextar, Jake said firmly, positioning himself between the Korthak and the rescued students. I need you to focus on my voice. The hunt is not here. These are not your enemies. The young warrior's head snapped toward Jake, his dark eyes showing the flat intensity of a predator challenged on its territory. You do not understand, human. The weak will slow us down. They will get the strong killed. No, Jake replied, his voice calm but absolute. The strong protect the weak. That is what separates warriors from beasts. For a moment, Vextar seemed to struggle between his awakening instincts and Jake's words. The philosophical concepts that had guided Korthak civilization warred with the primitive survival programming that had kept his species alive for millions of years. Jake pressed his advantage, speaking directly to the warrior code that Vextar had been trained to follow. A true warrior's strength is measured by what he protects, not what he destroys. Your honor comes from saving lives, not abandoning them. The words seemed to reach something deeper in Vextar's mind. His breathing began to slow, and the predatory focus in his eyes started to clear. But Jake knew the battle was not over. The stress of the situation would continue to trigger the young warrior's combat instincts. Linda's voice crackled through the communication device. "Jake, I have 2 more students ready to move, but one is badly injured. I do not think she can climb out on her own." Jake turned his attention back to the technical challenges, but kept part of his awareness focused on Vextar. The Korthak was fighting his own internal battle, trying to maintain rational thought while every instinct screamed at him to eliminate threats and preserve resources. "Vexitar, I need your strength for something only you can do," Jake said carefully. "The injured student needs to be carried out, but the route is too unstable for normal rescue methods." Jake was deliberately giving Vexitar a protective role rather than an aggressive one. Human understanding of psychology, developed through countless generations of social cooperation, suggested that channeling the warrior's instincts toward protection might help him maintain control. "What do you need me to do?" Vexitar asked, his voice strained but rational. "Create a new route. Use your strength to move the larger crystals and build a safer path for the injured. Make yourself into a shield between them and the dangers." The concept resonated with Korthak warrior philosophy. Instead of seeing the weak students as threats, Vexitar could reframe them as charges to be protected. His natural aggression could be redirected toward the actual dangers they faced. Vexitar moved back toward the debris field with renewed purpose. His massive strength, guided now by protective instincts rather than predatory ones, began clearing a path that would have been impossible for rescue equipment to navigate quickly. Meanwhile, Jake continued coordinating the overall rescue operation. His human capacity for multitasking allowed him to monitor air pressure levels, track toxic gas concentrations, manage the improvised medical station, and keep Vextar focused on productive activities. The next student to emerge from the debris was barely conscious, her breathing shallow from toxic gas exposure. Jake immediately guided her to the medical station where Neva had prepared emergency oxygen supplies. "How much longer can we maintain the air pressure?" Jake asked. "Maybe 10 more minutes," Neva replied. "The pumps are straining and I am seeing fluctuations in the system." Petra's scanner showed that toxic gas levels were starting to rise again in some areas. The improvised air pressure system was fighting a losing battle against the massive atmospheric leak caused by the collapsed crystals. Jake made rapid calculations in his head. 2 students were still trapped, and 1 was seriously injured. 10 minutes might not be enough time for a conventional rescue, but Jake's human ingenuity suggested alternatives that other species might not consider. "Linda, can you attach this emergency stretcher to the injured student?" Jake asked, passing a lightweight rescue device through the communication link. "Yes, but how will we get her through the debris field? The route is too narrow for a stretcher." Jake was already implementing his solution. Using cables from the environmental systems and pulleys improvised from crystal climbing gear, he created a simple but effective lifting system. "We are not going through the debris," Jake explained. "We are going over it." The plan required precise coordination between multiple people working in dangerous conditions. Jake positioned Vextar at the key anchor point, using the Korthak's strength to control the lifting cables. Neva managed the mechanical systems from the aquatic section. Petra and the other Flurians served as spotters, watching for structural problems that could cause the improvised system to fail. Linda attached the injured student to the emergency stretcher and gave the signal. Jake's lifting system engaged smoothly, raising the unconscious girl above the unstable debris field. Vexitar's controlled strength guided the stretcher along the planned route, avoiding the most dangerous crystal formations. Steady pressure. "Vextar," Jake called out. "You are her lifeline right now." The young warrior's face showed intense concentration as he managed the cables with precise control. His predatory instincts were now completely focused on protecting the vulnerable student, transforming potential aggression into absolute determination to save her life. The stretcher cleared the main debris field and reached the safe zone. Jake and Neva immediately began treating the injured student for toxic gas exposure and physical trauma. Her breathing was weak but steady, and initial medical scans showed no life-threatening injuries. "One more student to go," Linda reported. "But Jake, the air pressure is failing. I can see toxic gas starting to rise again." Jake checked his environmental readings. The improvised system had pushed far beyond its design limits. They had maybe 5 more minutes before toxic gas levels became lethal even in the trapped area. Linda, "Get out of there now!" Jake ordered. "Bring the last student with you, but do not risk both your lives if the situation becomes impossible." "I am not leaving anyone behind," Linda replied firmly. Jake felt a surge of pride in the young Zekthe's courage, but also deep concern for her safety. The rescue operation had succeeded beyond his hopes, but these final moments would be the most dangerous. Vexatar appeared at Jake's side, his breathing controlled but his eyes showing determination rather than aggression. "Human, your leadership has been worthy of a true warrior. What do you need me to do?" Jake looked at the young Korthak who had fought his own instincts to help save lives. "Help me bring our friends home," he said simply. Together, human ingenuity and Korthak's strength prepared for the final phase of a rescue that had already proven that cooperation between species was possible even under the most extreme circumstances. The final rescue required everything Jake had learned about leadership, engineering, and interspecies cooperation. With toxic gas levels rising and his improvised air pressure system failing, he had less than 5 minutes to extract Linda and the last trapped student. Jake's human brain shifted into the high-stress mode that had kept his species alive through countless emergencies. Time seemed to slow as his enhanced pattern recognition identified every available resource and potential solution. The same mental processes that had helped human ancestors escape predators and survive natural disasters now guided him through the collapsing biodome. "Vextar, I need you to create one final path," Jake said, his voice calm despite the urgency of the situation. "But this time, you are going in personally to help Linda." The Korthak warrior nodded grimly. His combat instincts, now properly channeled toward protection rather than aggression, made him the perfect choice for a dangerous rescue mission. "What are my orders?" Jake quickly outlined the plan. Vexatar would use his natural armor and strength to bulldoze through the most unstable section of debris, creating a wider passage that would allow both students to escape quickly. The route would be dangerous and might trigger a secondary collapse, but it was their only option with the air pressure system failing. "Remember, you are not hunting," Jake reminded the young warrior. "You are rescuing. Your instincts should focus on bringing them home safely." Vextar's expression showed complete understanding. The philosophical framework Jake had given him provided a way to use his predatory abilities for protection rather than destruction. "I will not fail them, human." While Vextar moved toward the debris field, Jake coordinated the support systems that would make the rescue possible. Neva adjusted the water flow controls to provide maximum air pressure for as long as the system could handle it. Petra and the other Florians positioned themselves as emergency spotters, their keen senses watching for signs of structural failure. All students not directly involved in the rescue should move to the far end of the aquatic section, Jake announced. "If this triggers a larger collapse, we need everyone in the safest possible location." Professor Zenmak, who had been coordinating with external emergency crews, approached Jake with obvious admiration. "The rescue teams report they are still 20 minutes away from breaking through the main debris. What you have accomplished here is remarkable." Jake barely heard the praise. His attention was focused on monitoring every aspect of the rescue operation: environmental readings, structural stress indicators, communication channels with Linda, and Vextar. His human multitasking abilities allowed him to track all of it simultaneously. "Jake, I can see Vextar approaching," Linda reported through the communication device. "The toxic gas is getting worse, but your air pressure is still helping." "How is the last student?" Jake asked. "Conscious, but weak. I think he has a concussion, along with the gas exposure. He can move, but he will need help." Jake felt relief that the student was conscious. Carrying an unconscious person through unstable debris would have been nearly impossible, even for Vextar's strength. "Vextar is almost to your position," Jake said. "Get ready to move as soon as he clears the final obstacle." Through the structural monitoring systems, Jake could see Vextar's progress through the debris field. The young warrior moved with controlled aggression, using his natural armor to protect himself while systematically removing obstacles. His approach was methodical rather than reckless, showing that he had learned to balance instinct with rational planning. "I have reached them," Vextar reported. "The human student is weak but mobile. Linda appears uninjured." "Excellent," Jake replied. "Now bring them home. Steady movement, no unnecessary risks." The next few minutes tested everyone's nerve. Jake watched environmental readings spike as toxic gas found new pathways through the debris. His air pressure system fluctuated wildly, pushed far beyond its design limits. Structural stress indicators showed that Vextar's route was becoming increasingly unstable. But the rescue team kept moving. Vextar's protective instincts guided him carefully through the dangerous passage, supporting the injured student while Linda used her climbing skills to navigate the more treacherous sections. "Clear the main debris field in 30 seconds, Jake announced to the waiting group. "Medical team, prepare for immediate treatment of gas exposure and possible head trauma." Neva had the medical station optimally arranged, with emergency oxygen and trauma supplies ready for immediate use. The Aquarian student had proven to be an excellent medical coordinator, her calm nature helping to organize the more emotional prey species students. "Visual contact!" Petra called out from her spotting position. "I can see them emerging from the crystal section." Jake felt a surge of relief as he saw the three figures moving toward safety. Vextar was supporting the injured human student, moving with careful strength that showed complete control over his predatory instincts. Linda climbed alongside them, her insect-like agility helping to guide them around the remaining obstacles. But Jake's environmental monitors were showing critical readings. The improvised air pressure system was about to fail completely, and structural stress in the debris field was approaching catastrophic levels. "Everyone move to emergency positions now," Jake ordered. "The whole section is going to collapse." The rescued trio cleared the danger zone just as Jake's worst fears came true. The remaining crystal formations, weakened by the rescue operations and losing structural support, began a massive secondary collapse. The sound was deafening, like a mountain falling apart. Vextar threw himself protectively over the injured human student as debris rained down around them. Linda used her natural reflexes to dodge falling crystals with insect-like precision. Jake's early warning had given them just enough time to reach relative safety. When the dust settled, The entire crystal section of the biodome was a complete ruin, but all 30 students were accounted for and alive. Jake's improvised rescue operation had succeeded against overwhelming odds. Emergency medical crews arrived minutes later to find the situation already under control. The injured students were receiving proper treatment, the toxic gas had been contained, and everyone was safely accounted for. "How did you manage this?" asked Commander Dalthos, the lead emergency responder. "Our equipment could not even access the trapped students." Jake looked around at the students who had worked together to save their classmates. Vextar sat quietly nearby, his aggressive instincts completely calm now that the crisis was over. Linda was being treated for minor cuts, but was talking excitedly about the rescue operation. Petra and the other prey species students were no longer cowering in fear. They were proudly describing their roles in the successful mission. "We worked together," Jake said simply. Everyone contributed what they could do best. Professor Zenmak approached with obvious emotion in his ancient eyes. "You have demonstrated something remarkable today, young human. You have shown that leadership transcends species boundaries." Jake felt exhausted but satisfied. The rescue had proven that cooperation between predator and prey species was not just possible, it was powerful. When guided by intelligence and common purpose, their different abilities could complement each other perfectly. Vextar approached Jake as the emergency crews began cleaning up the collapsed biodome. "I owe you a debt, human," the young warrior said formally. "You showed me how to use my strength for protection rather than domination." "We all learned something today," Jake replied, "including me." As they walked out of the ruined biodome together, Jake realized that everything at the academy would be different now. The barriers between species had not disappeared, but they had been proven permeable. Fear could be overcome by understanding, and differences could become strengths when properly coordinated. The rescue operation had saved 7 lives, but its impact would extend far beyond those individual students. It had demonstrated that the Academy's ideals of galactic cooperation were not just theoretical concepts. They were practical realities that could work under the most extreme circumstances. 3 weeks after the biodome rescue, Jake walked through the halls of Nexus Galactic Academy and marveled at how much had changed. Students who had once avoided him now greeted him warmly. Florians no longer twitched their ears nervously when he approached, and Centauri students actually sought him out for study groups and social activities. The transformation had not happened overnight. In the days immediately following the rescue, there had been long discussions in classrooms and dormitories about what had really occurred in that collapsed biodome. Students talked about how their assumptions and fears had nearly prevented them from working together when it mattered most. Professor Zenmak had led many of these discussions, using the rescue as a teaching example of how diversity could become strength when properly coordinated. The ancient Altarian encouraged students to examine their own prejudices and consider how their species' evolutionary backgrounds affected their perceptions of others. Jake found Vextar in the Academy's new training facility, a space that had been created specifically to help the young Korthak channel his warrior instincts constructively. The room contained combat simulators and exercise equipment designed to provide physical challenges without actual violence. "The new facility suits you," Jake observed, watching Vextar work through a complex martial arts routine that emphasized control and precision over aggression. "It serves its purpose," Vextar replied, completing his sequence with fluid grace. "Though I find the most valuable training happens in the classrooms, not here." The young warrior had changed significantly since the rescue. His predatory edge was still present, but it was now tempered by wisdom and purpose. He had learned to see his strength as a tool for protection rather than domination, and other students had begun to recognize the honor that guided his actions. Professor Zenmach asked me to give a presentation to the Galactic Council next month, Jake said. They want to hear about emergency preparedness and interspecies cooperation. Vextar nodded approvingly. You should accept. Your leadership, during the crisis, demonstrated principles that extend far beyond emergency situations. Jake had been hesitant about the invitation. Speaking to the Galactic Council meant representing not just himself, but all of humanity. The responsibility felt overwhelming, especially since he was still just a student trying to find his place in galactic society. I am not sure I am qualified to advise the Council, Jake admitted. I just did what seemed necessary at the time. That is exactly why you are qualified, Vextar replied. You acted without considering species boundaries or traditional limitations. You saw problems and created solutions. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Linda, Petra, and Neva. The four students had become close friends since the rescue, bonded by their shared experience and mutual respect. Jake, you have to see this, Linda said excitedly, holding up her communication device. The Academy's rescue procedures are being rewritten based on your innovations during the biodome collapse. Jake read the official notice with amazement. His improvised air pressure system was being incorporated into the station's emergency protocols. The coordination methods he had developed were being taught to rescue teams throughout the galactic emergency services. They are calling it the Martinez method, Petra added proudly. Your approach to multi-species crisis coordination is being studied at academies across the galaxy. Jake felt overwhelmed by the recognition. He had not been trying to create new procedures or establish his reputation. He had simply been trying to save his classmates' lives using whatever resources were available. It feels strange to have my name attached to emergency procedures, Jake said. I was just combining ideas that already existed. That is what makes human thinking so valuable, Neva observed. Your species excels at seeing connections that others miss and combining different approaches into new solutions. The group walked together toward the dining hall, where Jake noticed another significant change. The rigid separation between predator and prey species had largely disappeared. Students still sat with their own species sometimes, but mixed groups were becoming increasingly common. At one table, Florian students were excitedly discussing a physics project with Altarian classmates. Nearby, a group of Zekthi were teaching Centauri students a complex mathematical game. Even some of the more reserved species had begun to participate in cross-cultural activities. Jake's table had become a regular gathering place for students from various species who wanted to discuss intercultural topics. The conversations were not always easy. Species differences still created misunderstandings and conflicts. But now students approached these differences with curiosity rather than fear. Jake, I wanted to thank you again, said Marcus, a human student who had been trapped in the biodome collapse. His recovery had been complete, with no lasting effects from the toxic gas exposure or head trauma. Thank all of us, Jake replied, gesturing to his friends. The rescue only worked because everyone contributed their unique abilities. Marcus nodded, but his expression remained serious. It was more than just the rescue, though. You showed everyone that being from a death world does not make someone automatically dangerous. You used your abilities to protect rather than threaten. The comment highlighted something Jake had been thinking about frequently. The rescue had changed how other students perceived humans, but it had also changed how Jake understood his own heritage. Earth's harsh conditions had indeed created certain traits in humanity: enhanced pattern recognition, crisis leadership abilities, and adaptability under stress. But these traits were tools that could be used for construction or destruction, depending on the choices humans made. Later that evening, Jake sat in his dormitory room working on his presentation for the Galactic Council. He wanted to capture the lessons learned during the biodome rescue without making it seem like humans were superior to other species. The truth was more complex than species superiority. Each species brought unique strengths developed through millions of years of evolution on different worlds. The key was learning how to combine these strengths effectively rather than letting differences create barriers. His communication device chimed with an incoming message from Earth. Jake smiled as he read updates from his family and friends back home. They were proud of his accomplishments, but they also reminded him that he was still the same person who had grown up hiking in Colorado mountains and camping under Earth's stars. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Professor Zenmach entered, carrying a formal document sealed with the insignia of the Galactic Council. "Your invitation to address the Council has been officially confirmed," the ancient Altarian said. "They are particularly interested in your thoughts on how Earth's environmental challenges prepared humans for leadership roles in crisis situations." Jake accepted the document with mixed feelings. The opportunity was incredible, but it also represented enormous responsibility. His words would influence how billions of beings throughout the galaxy viewed humanity and interspecies cooperation. "Professor, what if I say the wrong thing? What if I accidentally make things worse instead of better?" Professor Zenmach's wise eyes showed understanding. "Young human, the fact that you worry about such things proves you are the right person for this task. Wisdom begins with humility." As Jake prepared for sleep that night, he looked out his window at the stars beyond the academy. Somewhere among those distant suns were the homeworlds of his classmates, peaceful planets that had never known predators, harsh worlds that had forged warrior cultures, aquatic worlds where cooperation was essential for survival. Each world had contributed something valuable to galactic civilization. Earth's contribution was not superior to the others, but it was unique and necessary. The Deathworld that had created humanity had also given them the tools to bring different species together when cooperation mattered most. The young human, who had once sat alone in the Academy dining hall, was now preparing to address the leaders of galactic civilization. But more importantly, he was surrounded by friends from dozens of different worlds who had learned to see past species boundaries and work together toward common goals. The rescue in the biodome had saved 7 lives, but its true impact was still spreading throughout the galaxy. It had proven that differences could become strengths, that understanding could overcome fear, and that cooperation between species was not just possible. It was powerful enough to achieve things that no single species could accomplish alone. Jake fell asleep planning his speech to the Galactic Council, knowing that his words would carry the hopes and dreams of every student who believed that the future belonged to those who could work together despite their differences.